What is power? Where is power? How is power obtained? And why is power necessary for human beings to live and thrive? We'll answer these questions and many more like them in a quest to understand the true nature of power. But why should we attempt to understand the nature of power at all? Well, because all human beings crave and seek power. And craving, or to crave, is to experience desire. Human beings are innately filled with desire, and desire is the driving force behind all human activity. Concerning desire, Aristotle observed that it is the nature of desire not to be satisfied, and most human beings live only for the gratification of it. Human desire has been driving humanity since humanity's birth. And so to understand the nature of power and humanity's constant quest to obtain it, we must also examine and understand human desire. First, let's look at some definitions of desire. From Webster's New Universal Unabridged Dictionary of 1996, we find desire defined as to wish or long for, crave, want. A longing or craving for something that brings satisfaction or enjoyment. Sexual appetite or sexual urge. From a dictionary of the Bible by James Hastings, we find the English word lust, which is now restricted to sexual desire, formerly expressed strong desire of any kind. And finally, from Strong's Exhaustive Concordance to the Bible, 1890, in reference to Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, we find the Hebrew word for desire, chamad, which is to delight in, beauty, greatly beloved, covet, lust, pleasant or precious thing. From these definitions, we can generally conclude that humans desire power because power is viewed as something that brings satisfaction and enjoyment, something of beauty that is to be nurtured as a precious thing, and therefore our desire for it is very strong. But why? Why do we desire power so strongly? What does power afford us? What need is fulfilled through the wielding of power? Humans have many needs, both basic ones as well as highly complex ones. Our most basic needs are a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, hydration, and nourishment. In other words, air, water, and food. These represent our basic survival needs. Next, we have some needs that are a little more complex, but still pretty basic nonetheless. These needs can be summed up fairly simple by expressing them as needs for shelter and security from the natural elements of our environment. We tend to these needs by building shelters that protect us from the natural elements and from the threat of predators of all kinds, both animal and human. These needs are primarily instinctual in their nature, and so they become the needs we humans generally tend to from the very beginning of our lives. We are all alike in the sense that we all have these basic needs and the instinctual desire to continually fulfill them. Where we tend to differ as human beings is not found in our needs or in our innate desire to fulfill them. Where human beings begin to differ from one another individually is in our individual choices concerning the methods we apply in our quest for needs fulfillment. But before we examine the various methods applied in fulfilling our needs, we have yet another question to ask and examine. What human purpose is met by breathing, drinking, eating, building, and protecting? Obviously, the first three functions sustain human life, but the last two serve another purpose. Building shelters and protecting what we deem to be ours are simply methods of control. Therefore, what we find in the basic human needs is a universal desire to sustain and control life. To sustain and control life are human imperatives that cannot be denied, albeit they may be diluted, distorted, and even derailed. Human life is primarily sustained through procreation. But how do we control human life? How does the individual control his or her own destiny as an individual in a population of now nearly 7 billion individuals? More importantly, how do we gain control over anything? And just exactly what is control? Rather, what is the definition of control? And with this question, we have arrived at the start of our journey of understanding the nature of human power. Because control, albeit a subjective construct of the human psyche, does have a definition that lends itself to physical application in the real and material world of human affairs. The definition of control is simple. Control equals power applied divided by time. With this definition of control, we are provided with an equation. To solve for C, which represents control, we merely need to apply power, which is represented by the letter P and letter A in the parentheses, over some period of time, which is represented by the letter T under the division bar. However, in solving some equations, you must first solve for some of the elements of the equation. In this case, we still don't know what power is. So to find the solution for C, we must first find the solution for P, so that we can know how to apply power in our efforts to produce control. And so finally, we arrive back at our first real question about power. What is it? How do we define power? Fortunately, this is simple because just like control is defined by a very simple equation, so too power is defined by an equation. Power equals work divided by time. Once again, though, in order to truly define power, or solve for P in the equation, we must first solve for one of the elements of the equation now in question. In this case, we need to solve for W. In other words, what is the definition of work? Just like control and power, work also can be defined by an equation. Work equals a force applied divided by time. We're still not done solving equations, though. Now we need to define what a force is and how to apply it. However, before we explore the world of force, let's take a quick look back at the ground we've covered so far. Human beings have various needs, and human desire is what propels us forward toward fulfilling those needs. The purpose of needs fulfillment is to serve two human imperatives: sustain and control life. Therefore, sustaining and controlling life becomes the object of our greatest desires. In our efforts to sustain and control life, we find that we need certain power to achieve our goals, and so we are driven towards understanding, seeking, and wielding power. But is the pursuit of power in the service of sustaining and controlling our lives as simple as the equations put forth to define power and control? The answer is an unequivocal yes. The pursuit of power is a simple one, and therefore, power is easy to obtain. Wielding power may not be so simple, however. But for now, let us return to the process of solving equations. As we have already identified, control equals power applied divided by time. Power equals work divided by time, and work equals a force applied divided by time. All we need understand now is what constitutes a force and how to apply it. Fortunately, in the context of human affairs, we need not dig too deep into the sciences of force. Only a few basic principles are needed. First, there are generally two types of pure force. They are physical and radiant. Of physical force, there are two basic types: manual and machine. Of radiant force, there are also two basic types: luminous and thermal. Here in our early explorations of power, we are only going to examine physical force as it pertains to humanity within certain operational domains of human activity and life. We do this primarily since the vast majority of power generated on Earth is through human physical activity. So, for the moment, in looking at force and defining what it is, we will be examining only those primary manual forces applied by human beings throughout the entirety of their affairs. There are three sources of manual force available to human beings within the physical world. They are wealth, knowledge, and violence. However, before these forces are applied for the purpose of work, they must first be transformed from their subjective conceptual state into objective tools that physically aid human beings in their work and pursuit of power. In other words, wealth, knowledge, and violence as forces are, in their pure form, subjective and abstract concepts. As such, they must be represented in the physical and material world by physical and material things that symbolize the nature of the force through their physical intrinsic value. Through the process of attachment, humans associate their desires to control and sustain life with physical objects of value that symbolize the force applications necessary to produce work and generate power. Through the use of objects, humanity, over its long and tumultuous history, has always symbolized wealth with money, knowledge with information, and violence with conflict or war. Therefore, for daily application of force in the pursuit of power, humans prefer the use of money, information, and conflict. Armed with these three force applications, humans spend their lives applying those forces in order to sustain and control their lives. In this, humans are of one accord. However, we are all very different in how we apply in quantity, quality, and ratio these three forces in our efforts to fulfill our common imperatives. Join me in episode 2 of Human Power, where we will further examine these three force applications and how they complete the circuit for power generation within the 4 realms of human life and activity.